When you want to set up a server, you essentially install a service or application on that server, like a file storage service. Then that server will provide those services to the machines that request it. Maybe you thought you'd install services on a user operating system like Windows 10. While that's an option, typically in an organization, you'll want to install your services on a server operating system. Server operating systems are regular operating systems that are optimized for server functionality. This includes functions like allowing more network connections and more RAM capacity. Most operating systems have versions specifically made for servers. In Windows, you have Windows Server. In Linux, many distributions come with server counterparts like Ubuntu Server, which is optimized for server use. Mac OS is also available in Mac OS Server. Server operating systems are usually more secure and come with additional services already built in, so you don't have to set up these services separately. You can read more about the different server operating systems in the next supplemental reading. For now, just keep in mind that when you install services on a server, you should be sure to use a dedicated server operating system. We discussed virtual machines in the last course and covered how to set up a virtual machine on a personal computer. In this lesson, we're going to talk about why virtualization can be an important part of infrastructure services and systems administration. There are two ways you can run your services, either on dedicated hardware or on a virtualized instance on a server. When you virtualize a server, you're putting lots of virtual instances on one server. Each instance contains a service. There are a bunch of pros and cons to running your services on either of these platforms. Here's the rundown. Performance. A service running on a dedicated hardware will have better performance than service running in a virtualized environment. This is because you only have one service using one machine, as opposed to many services using one machine. Cost. Server hardware can be pretty expensive. If you put a service on one piece of dedicated hardware and have to do that for 9 other services, it starts to add up. One of the huge benefits to virtualizing your servers is that you can have 10 services running on 10 different virtual instances, all on one physical server. Here's another way to think about this. In a typical server, if you only have one service running, it's probably only taking up 10 to 20% of your CPU utilization. The rest of the hardware isn't being utilized. You could add plenty more services to the physical server and still have a good threshold for resource utilization. It's cheaper to run several services on one machine than it is to run many services on multiple machines. Maintenance. Servers require hardware maintenance and routine operating system updates. Sometimes you need to take the service offline to do that maintenance. With virtualized servers, you can quickly stop your service or migrate them to another physical server, then take as much time as you need for maintenance. Virtualized servers make server maintenance much easier to do. Points of failure. When you put a service on one physical machine and that machine has issues, you're entering a world of trouble. With virtualized servers, you can easily move services off a physical machine and spin up the same service on a different machine as a backup. You could also do this with a physical server, but that could become costly if you account for multiple servers. Pro tip, you can prevent a single point of failure on a physical machine if you have a redundant servers set up, meaning you have duplicate servers as a backup. You'll learn about backups in an upcoming module. As you can see, there are lots of benefits to using virtualized servers. Just make sure to weigh the pros and cons of virtualizing your servers and using dedicated server hardware. That way, you can make the right choice for your company. Another important part of physical infrastructure services is the ability to connect to your infrastructure from anywhere in the world. We talked about remote access in an earlier course, and we've been using it all throughout this program to connect to our lab machines. In this lesson, we're going to discuss what's needed to set up for remote access for a small organization. As a systems administrator or as anyone in IT support, you'll want to be able to remotely access another server or user's machine so that you can troubleshoot an issue or do maintenance from wherever you may be. In Linux, the most popular remote access tool is OpenSSH. We've already learned how to SSH into a remote computer in the last course, and we talked a bit about what's needed to set up SSH, but we'll quickly show you how to do this. To SSH into another machine, you need to install an SSH client on the machine you're connecting from. Then install an SSH server on the machine you're connecting to. To learn more about OpenSSH, you can check out the next supplementary reading. But let's keep rocking and rolling with how to install the OpenSSH client on a machine. It's super easy. What you're going to do is I'm going to go to my client machine and simply run this command, sudo apt-get install OpenSSH client. And downloading the package. Perfect. So it looks like my client has been installed. Next, you need to install the OpenSSH server on the machine you want to access. Remember, the SSH server is just a process that listens for incoming SSH connections. So let's go to the server and install the OpenSSH server. So I'm going to do sudo apt-get install OpenSSH server. Perfect. So it looks like my server is up and running. So let's go back to the client and do a test. I do SSH. Enter my server IP address with my username. So ask for my password, which is a good thing. Perfect. So as you can see, I'm connected to my server, and one true way to test this is if I go into my desktop of my server, and let me create a folder. Now if I go back to my server, which is on this window, I list the files, you can see the folder test, and that's it. Now you're able to SSH into a machine from another machine. Not too complicated, right? Windows has similar tools that you can use. A popular tool to access the CLI remotely is WinRM or PuTTY. RDP is also popular if you want to access the GUI remotely. We've already discussed how to connect to a machine using PuTTY in the last course. Just remember to install an SSH server on the machine you want to connect to. We also already discussed how to set up RDP in the last course. Feel free to review those lessons as a refresher. You can read more about the Windows remote access tools in the next reading. The takeaway here is that when you manage IT infrastructure, you can utilize tools like remote access to work on your physical infrastructure. You'll need to do a little bit of setup beforehand, like installing the SSH client, SSH servers, and allowing remote desktop connections, etc. But it'll be worth it in the long run. Next up, we'll tackle network service. See you there.